John Maynard Keynes was responding to the reality of the Great Depression. And what his argument really centered on was the idea that investment is largely unstable. We can see from past lectures that we have this concept that Keynes adds to the focus of macroeconomics called the multiplier effect. The idea that all of our spending actually should really come with an additional multiplier attached to it. That any spending with consumption should have a multiplier. That any investment spending should have a multiplier. That any government spending should have a multiplier also associated with it. We could add in net exports, but here we just show a closed economy. The idea is that if investment goes up a little bit, then overall output would go up a lot, right? There's a multiplier effect to our economy. With the multiplier, aggregate demand, or output in this case, can vary greatly and get strongly off course with just relatively small changes in consumption, investment, or government expenditures. Even though the classicals argue that consumption is relatively stable, even if it varies some, the Keynesians argue that it has a larger impact than perhaps the classicals are acknowledging. Now, the classicals understand this concept of the multiplier, but the Keynesians are bringing it to the forefront and arguing that that multiplier perhaps is larger and more impactful than what we are currently using with our analysis as classical economists in our story so far. Keynes is going to say, okay, so aggregate demand can get us off track, fine. But it's even a worse story than this. It's not just that there's, this multiplier effect and maybe the multiplier is a little larger than what we think. Keynes is going to argue that the multiplier, sure, it's there, and Keynesians are going to follow with that argument. But what he's more explicitly going to argue is that I itself is unstable, right? So if we have this unstable I, investment, and then the multiplier effect, what we can get is swings in aggregate demand. So why is I kind of have this instability in this setting? There's two separate but really related major explanations in the Keynesian kind of approach to macroeconomics as to why investment is unstable. And we'll look at both of these. One we'll look at is called animal spirits, and the second is a Keynesian beauty contest. First up, let's look at the beauty contest. Keynesian beauty contests are often represented using the tool in economics called game theory. So that's how we're going to do this here. So we're going to look at a game theoretic beauty contest. Here's how this works. The basic idea is that each player within this beauty contest game simultaneously chooses a number within the interval of 0 to 100. Your goal is to try to win by getting the closest to a target outcome. So what we're going to do is we're going to take an average of all the numbers that are guessed by anybody, and we're going to divide that by 2, and the player whose number is closest to that target outcome, the average divided by 2, wins the prize. So these are our 5 steps here. Players pick a number from 0 to 100. I collect all of the numbers from all the players. I average them together, and we could call this average x. Then I take 1/2 times x, and that equals y. Whoever's outcome is closest to y wins. So let's imagine a beauty contest is played by 3 individuals. They take step 1. They pick a number between 0 and 100. So let's say the first individual picks 10, the second individual picks 20, and the third individual picks 24. They're trying to win this beauty contest, and they know that the average of the numbers is going to be multiplied by 1/2, and that they want to be closest to the outcome of the average divided by 1/2. So they're picking some pretty low numbers here. I collect these numbers in step 2. I have all 3 of these numbers, and I calculate an average of these 3 numbers. When I do an average of these 3 numbers, I get an average of 18. So we might think the closest to 18 will end up winning. So this person picked a number pretty close to 18 here. Well, this isn't the end of the game though. We're only at stage 3. This person isn't going to win. We're not asking who gets closest to the average. We're asking who gets closest to the average after we do step 4. So we have to calculate half of the average. So 1/2 of our average is 9. And so step 5, the player whose number is closest to this, the 1/2 the average, that's the person who's going to win. So the person closest to 9 here is the first individual, right, who estimated that the outcome was 10. So notice the outcome here is actually lower than all of the numbers because we have this 1/2 multiplier towards it. So player 1 would be the one to win in this case with guesses of 10, 20, and then 24. So why call this a beauty contest? Well, Keynes had seen an example in a newspaper where there was an actual beauty contest. And so there were contestants like A, B, and C. And then there are a whole bunch of individuals who are kind of picking, well, who's going to win this beauty contest? Person A, person B, or person C? And Keynes drew this analogy that the way the beauty contest was run was not to pick the one that everybody everybody thinks is the prettiest, but the one that everybody else thinks is the prettiest. So within this beauty contest, the winner was the one who picked the average ranking of all the contestants. The one who won the beauty contest was not somebody who just said, oh, well, I think A is the prettiest, and so A wins, and I, have won the beauty contest. The goal was actually not between the contestants A, B, and C, but the contest was between all of the individuals who were picking. And the goal was to pick the most representative winner of the beauty contest, right? The goal was to say, hey, do you have an eye for what all of America thinks is pretty, or all of this population thinks will pick? So if you are this person here, and you genuinely do think that person A is the prettiest, you might, in this situation, not select A as the winner because you see that all of these other individuals, you know that they don't really see things the way that you do, and they all think that C is the prettiest. And so if you're person A, you want to actually pick C as well. Your goal is to match with everybody else. Now, why in the world does this matter for macroeconomics? Why are we talking about a beauty contest and doing game theory where we're trying to estimate what numbers other people will be picking? Keynes is relating this metaphor and other types of approaches to this kind of behavior to the stock market. He's saying it's all about speculation when it comes to the stock market, and in particular, what we invest in and how we feel the market is actually going. He feels it's all speculation. It's all individuals looking at what other individuals are going to do. It's not so much that we look at the stock price of Disney and say, hey, I think Disney's going to go up. Instead, what we're doing is we're saying, what do I think all of the other individuals think is going to happen to Disney's stock price? If everybody thinks that Disney's stock price is going to go down, even though I think Disney's in a good situation, I shouldn't be buying more of it expecting the price to go up. I need to understand that the other people determine what happens to Disney's stock price. And so I'm speculating on what other people believe. Just as we did in the beauty contest, Keynes is arguing investment largely follows this kind of behavior. In other words, investment follows more psychological phenomena than rational economic calculation. We can see this with the move to modern behavioral economics, where we see things in behavioral finance, such as the hot hand fallacy or the house money effect. And we see bubbles that potentially could arise out of these effects, right? The idea of the house money effect is that in the stock market, if the stock market goes up, all of a sudden what happens is people feel like they're playing with house money. So they get a little bit more risky with their investments. And as people get more risky, sure, there might be big bang for their buck, but we might also have some kind of epic collapses. And these kind of things can create bubbles that can lead to problems in the macroeconomy. If we get these big swings because we are following non-rational economic calculation and instead are following kind of behavioral anomalies or our psychological factors, then what we could see is that aggregate demand could swing a little bit. We're speculating We're guessing what other people are actually doing. We're not basing our calculation on returns on investment and price to earning ratios in stocks and what the actual value of assets are. Instead, what we're doing is we're speculating in stock markets and in kind of investment protocol as to what are all the other individuals thinking. And that speculation can kind of ebb and flow. And so what Keynes is really doing here is he's introducing a concept called animal spirits. This sounds kind of bizarre and like it doesn't fit in an economics class, but really the idea of animal spirits does fit within our modern discussion of macroeconomics. The basic idea here is that psychological phenomena are really driving the investment decisions that we're thinking about happening in a macroeconomic situation. Theoretically, lower interest rates could help shift aggregate demand back out as a special form of self-correction. When we enter into a recession, that could theoretically take place in some special conditions. So if demand for investments drops and we get this drop in interest rates, this could theoretically help kind of spur large-scale consumption purchases and more investment to bounce the economy back out. If we have lower interest rates theoretically push our aggregate demand curve back out. However, central banks often control and manipulate interest rates, and their actions might prevent this bouncing back from happening. But even if the central bank doesn't get in the way, Keynes's argument is even stronger. Keynes is using the loanable funds market to say that this doesn't work. He draws one graph in his general theory, and this is the graph that he draws, the loanable funds market. He draws this graph to say this is what we're doing away with. This does not work. The loanable funds market doesn't work this way. It's not acting like a standard economic market. Instead of savings and investment being coordinated by the interest rate, they follow animal spirits. Today, we often think of animal spirits as kind of consumer confidence. More specifically, consumer confidence following a herd-like mentality. We can get spooked and lose our animal spirit and all run away from the markets. And so it doesn't really matter what the interest rate is. If we are spooked and we feel like times are really, really tough, we don't care what the interest rate is. We're not going to invest in a new business or a new opportunity. Or it could become that we become overconfident and we have too much animal spirit kind of driving things forward. It doesn't really matter what the interest rate is. We feel like there's no way this project or what I'm engaging in terms of my investment is going to fail. So I'll pay whatever interest rate I need to. So we're not really kind of doing this rational economic calculation in terms of our savings and investment that shows up in our loanable funds market. And instead, we're following animal spirits. And that's really what Keynes drives home in his general theory early on. It's this idea that psychology needs to be more wrapped into the macroeconomics that we are considering. And so if you take the beauty contest speculation along with a multiplier effect, then we could see that the economy could experience some seemingly wild swings. Wild swings can cause psychological effects, i.e. animal spirits. And this can create additional reinforcement to that trend. So investment can be very problematic. It can buck the classical stories idea of prices rationally and efficiently adjusting the macroeconomy. And if I is problematic and can create these little speculations and little swings, plus the multiplier, plus animal spirits, then I can wildly fluctuate, and that means that aggregate demand can wildly fluctuate. So we get this idea that aggregate demand is really key for Keynes and a cause of the depressions. Remember, we're trying to understand how could we get a situation like this? The classical macro that we have thus far tells a story of self-correction. And while we have to wait to the long run, no one thought the long run was 3 years, let alone 5 years, let alone 8 years, let alone 11 years. And the Great Depression was taking over a decade. By doing away with the loanable funds market as a way to help coordinate the rational calculation of investment, Keynes had brought to the forefront this idea that aggregate demand can fall wildly without much hope for adjustments in prices, and aggregate demand also won't just automatically adjust us back to full employment. Without the loanable funds market coordinating investment, aggregate demand can have wild swings and get stuck. And when you tie that in with the inability of the self-corrective mechanism to move the short-run aggregate supply or even the aggregate demand curve, we could imagine problems like the Great Depression. This is how we could get stuck below full employment. Investment swings wildly. We have a multiplier effect. Investment is driven by animal spirits and the speculation that is showcased in the beauty contest. We have major problems in the investment side of the macroeconomy, and so we can end up with terrible, terrible outcomes where we have very high unemployment. We can end up without self-correction. So where are we left? We can see why the economic disease might happen in a Keynesian world. We can see why we could get our economy sick and stuck below full employment. And now we're left thinking about how to move aggregate demand out as the only potential cure for our disease. That, however, will be the topic in the upcoming lectures. To understand what Keynes's cure might be, click on the videos linked here, and we'll turn from understanding how the Great Depression could happen to, well, what could we do if we were in a Great Depression? What cures this disease that we have said could develop? Click on the video here to keep going.